Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 U.S. states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eben Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much-needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the two hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forwards, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
Good morning, good evening, and good night, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us here on UETV. And for those of you joining us on Facebook, hello to you as well. Now, we have a fantastic show set up for you this afternoon, and it's beyond words, just going to be amazing. So I just want to thank you for joining us, allowing us into your homes, and allowing us to share this unique knowledge with you. Now, a bit about the initiative. As you would have seen the initial video, it's a fantastic initiative that targets over 100 universities and over 100,000 students. And I believe being launched yesterday, we've already eclipsed that. But enough about the initiative. What are we here at the university doing in this unique part of the world, representing the entire Caribbean region? And I think it's unique to say that one thing we're doing is bridging the gap, bringing academia with youth leadership. And this initiative this evening is one that is setting out to do that. So let's dive right into it. And I would like to bring the initial opening remarks by Dr. Stacey Richards Kennedy, Director, the Office of Global Partnerships and Sustainable Futures. Dr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manning. And it's a pleasure to bring opening remarks for this UWI webinar, which, as you heard, is part of a global series of conversations organized by 100 universities across more than 50 countries worldwide in commemoration of Earth Month. The University of the West Indies is globally recognized as an activist university that is committed to excellence in teaching, research, and public service to our Caribbean region. In the international development arena, a key component of development effectiveness and development impact is to create innovative solutions and to move beyond thinking and learning into action. The university's work on SDG 13 and the climate agenda is only one of the many areas in which our UWI students and staff have and continue to distinguish themselves, both as scholars and as activists. As you may know, the University of the West Indies was selected by the International Association of Universities to lead the Global University Consortium on SDG 13. A group of eminent universities from all geographic regions, including Universidad de los Andes, which has spearheaded the participation of universities from Latin America and the Caribbean region for this series of global virtual dialogues to solve climate by 2030, and to make climate a class. Allow me to specially thank our colleagues at the SDG Center of Uniandes and the Bard College for organizing this important and timely global initiative of which the UWI is proud to be a part. Just earlier today, we held an important virtual roundtable with climate researchers from across our 5 campuses and specialized research centers, focused on advancing teaching, research, and partnerships linked to oceanography and the blue economy. And we were joined by international organizations like the Association of Commonwealth Universities and the Commonwealth Secretariat and others because of their tremendous interest in collaborating with the UWI to support the excellent work being done by our faculty and our students in collaboration with a host of public, private, and civil society actors. We at the UWI believe in the power of partnerships. And through today's webinar, we have another platform for our students and youth leaders to participate in important discussions, share their experiences and ideas, and discuss how together we can accelerate and amplify these solutions and move us closer towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I particularly like the title, which underscores the urgency of now and the fact that young people in the Caribbean are concerned about climate justice, climate solutions, and are committed to taking action now. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more from our presenters and participants, because it is by pooling our expertise and resources and by bringing our best ideas to the table, particularly those innovative ideas of our students and youth leaders, that we will be able to overcome the challenges presented by climate change and build more sustainable and inclusive societies. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those strong remarks, Dr. Kennedy. Just giving a glimpse as to some of the work that the university is up to. Now, I just want to take this opportunity to remind you to any questions you may have to submit them via the Facebook, or if you're joining us via uetv.org, to submit them there as well, and we will be able to discuss them later on in this discussion. Now, let's jump into it. And first up, I would like to bring Dr. Keron Niles, lecturer in the Institute for International Relations based out of St. Augustine, Trinidad. Dr. Niles.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Or good morning, wherever you are. It's good to be live. Rather than pre-recorded, is what I mean. We're going to be talking today specifically about climate change as it relates to the Caribbean. And we're going to look specifically at climate solutions and what that means. I think it's important for us to reflect, right, on some obvious realities to begin with. Of course, the first obvious reality that we need to reflect on is we didn't really cause this problem, but we really have a lot of skin in the game. We have a lot to lose. Our homes, our islands, our culture, our heritage. To drive this point home, I always ask my students, what would it be like if the only place that you could get one of our coveted local national dishes? We don't have an official one, but let's say one like doubles. And if you haven't had it yet, feel free to come to the Caribbean, check it out. But what would it be like if you could only get it in Norway or New York? What is the intangible heritage loss that you would experience? Speaking of loss, a mere 3 years ago, in a matter of minutes, the lives of residents of East Trinidad were transformed. I took this picture when I went to help a colleague to try to rebuild their life. And it really caused me to reflect on what it must feel like to see all of your life's savings, see all of the things that you've acquired over decades in a mound. You know, when you first move into a house and you're trying to balance a budget, sometimes you are having to decide between buying cutlery or putting up curtains. You know, sometimes the budgets are balanced so finely that you have to really think about, can I eat this food with salsa, or can I afford to get new spectacles? And through the years, we are able to accumulate the things that we need to live. But in minutes, the residents of Greenville in Trinidad and Tobago saw all of their belongings inundated, and they had to be placed into the mound that you see on the screen and burnt. I managed to get this picture just before it was burnt. And so I can't even begin to think about the trauma that some persons might experience by seeing their belongings go up in flames. So what can we actually do? We can be aware of our own footprint, and we can use our skills to find local solutions to a very, very global problem. And we can ensure that every government represented on this live, on this call, on this conference, takes actions. And we can make sure that our friends know about it and our friends take action as well. It's not enough to know about this problem. We have to do something about this problem. That is clear. And at the state level, climate change is relevant to development. And so we have to mainstream or infuse, might be a better word. We have to infuse climate change into development planning, into all areas of policy making. And not just that, but we have to climate proof the investments that we are already making. So whether or not you've been to the Caribbean, I can assure you, if you come here, what you would find is many, many beachfront properties. You would find hotels and significant investments made on shorelines. Obviously, because tourists love to go to bed and step out of their room and into the water, that's an ideal vacation. But it could quickly turn into a nightmare if there's a hurricane. So we need to think through how we are making investments in the future within the Caribbean. We need to mainstream climate change into development planning. We need to educate people within the Caribbean and worldwide. And we also need to think about how climate change policies affect people within our own shores and how the climate change policies of other countries affect us in the Caribbean. Certainly, as persons become more climate conscious, we are going to see persons deciding to take less long-haul flights. And that means less traditional tourists or less tourists from traditional destinations. That might be excellent for the environment, but we in the Caribbean need to make the necessary adjustments so that it doesn't result in economic ruin. Fundamentally, we have a design problem. We've built our economies on a take, make, and waste model, on a very linear model. We've built our economies on models that entirely ignore, for the most part, what can be referred to as external costs of our production. So the waste that maybe a cruise liner might leak into a Caribbean sea, or the carbon that is emitted from those oil and gas producing nations within the Caribbean, they haven't been accounted for a long time. But we can redesign our reality. That's entirely possible because our current retrofits of colonial designs is certainly not sustainable. Those aren't sustainable. That is certain. I know that from all of the English-speaking Caribbean, all of our industries were inherited. Perhaps with a real few exceptions. Tourism, oil and gas for Trinidad and Tobago, those activities began before we became independent. And I know that we inherited a lot. We even inherited the design of our cities, where streets were. But if we're going to change the fabric of the future, we have to redesign and not simply retrofit. We need to ask ourselves, how do we adapt to more intense and more frequent hurricanes? How do we do that? I think COVID is giving us just a little glimpse that adaptation can be painful. Adaptation can be uncomfortable. So while we try to think about whether or not we have to adapt to our life with our coral reefs, we might want to think about what we're currently doing now to adapt to this pandemic. Because at the end of the day, what the pandemic is forcing us to realize is that we have to reevaluate our relationship with the environment. In adapting to COVID, you have to decide to go out less. You have to socially distance. You have to wear a mask. Or at least you should. That, in many cases, it's uncomfortable. It's inconvenient. But at least for COVID, it's temporary. COVID is perhaps one of our first glimpses, for many of us, our first glimpse at a really, truly global problem. Climate change has no vaccine. And if COVID is even a marker, a sample of how we're going to respond, we're all in trouble. We cannot revert to nationalistic tendencies, to holding on to ventilators, to holding on to vaccines when it comes to climate change. Global responses to adapt to local realities. That's what we require. That's what we need. And so at this stage of our development, at this time in history, we need to ask ourselves, do we really have the best relationship with the natural environment? Because COVID began because we abused the relationship with the natural environment. Climate change is happening because we put lots and lots of carbon dioxide where it didn't belong. It didn't belong in the atmosphere. We decided that we wanted more energy, and so we put it there. Problem wasn't carbon dioxide is harmless on its own, but it's our processes, our lifestyles that have brought us to where we are because we've ignored the impact on the environment. We need to reevaluate that now, and we need to think of ourselves as living in a global community. Because what affects one of us affects all of us. And until we all experience environmental justice, none of us are experiencing it. I want to thank you for taking time to spend with us here today as you listen to the realities that we face here in the Caribbean. But our Caribbean challenges are just a glimpse of the global challenge to reevaluate our relationship with the environment and to live more sustainably. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Niles, as he encouraged us in having a better understanding of some of the challenges that we face here in the Caribbean, especially encouraging us in the last couple of words to reevaluate our relationship with the environment. If there's anything that you want to ask Dr. Niles, I encourage you once again to place those questions, whether Facebook or uetv.org, and we will post them directly to Dr. Niles as we enter into that segment later on. But coming up next, I want to introduce a young lady who, to me, is a youth leader already in her own regard, hailing from Guyana in a youth speak sort of way. I would like to introduce Miss Suphane Alleyne, coming from the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. Miss Alleyne.
Good day, everyone. My name, as mentioned, is Miss Suphane Alleyne, and I am the Public Relations Officer of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. And today we'll be looking at climate change from the Caribbean perspective. So here's the outline of my presentation. So let's get into it. Firstly, we must look at climate change. So the UNFCCC has a definition for climate change. It defines it as the change of climate, which is attributed or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate observed over comparable time periods. You see, the key thing here is human activity indirectly or directly altering the composition of the atmosphere. So if we look at climate change from a Caribbean perspective, we must know what defines the Caribbean region. So the Caribbean actually is a sub-oceanic basin of the Western Atlantic Ocean. It is divided into 5 submarine basins. The climate of the Caribbean is generally tropical, as we're known as the tropic sand, and locally temperatures and climates may vary, but we are tropical. Here is a map showing the region, the Caribbean region. Please look closely and you will see that Belize, Guyana, and Suriname are said to be a part of the Caribbean region as their continental. If we're going to speak about climate change from a Caribbean perspective, we must speak about small and developing states. All of the countries in the map shown to you are considered to be small and developing states and large ocean states, as they share common challenges both economically, environmentally, and geographically. You see, climate change has a very tangible impact on the states. In 2017, Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and Nate wreaked havoc during the hurricane season, causing some of the most devastating action when it comes to communications, energy, and even infrastructure in these countries. And there's also the slow onset of events such as sea level rise, which pose an existential threat to small island communities, sometimes causing drastic measures to take place, such as the relocation of populations. And there's also challenges that come from the relocation of population. And these challenges are compounded by limited financial resources, high degree of vulnerability. All of these are shared amongst these countries, and many of them are Caribbean nations. One second, it's taking a while to the next. Yes. Here we have some pictures of what would have occurred during 2017 with the hurricanes. As you see, that did not affect one Caribbean nation. Thus, 3 of the many Caribbean nations affected by these 4 hurricanes in 2017. And if we are to continue along the lines of small island developing states, we must look at a study done by the Caribbean Studies, the Institute of Caribbean economies, lifestyle activities and practices, and even the cycles are intricately linked to climate, making them vulnerable to variation or changes. You see, an example of this is when the climate extremes impact our agriculture, our fisheries, our health, our tourism, even our recreation or energy use. We in the Caribbean plan our lives around the climate. We plant certain crops in certain seasons. We plant certain seasons. We have own outdoor events, our parks, our concerts, everything is planned around the climate. And this, however, would cause long-term development issues. If our long-term development plans cannot properly incorporate climate information that is accurate, we will incur a lot of issues, especially in the agricultural sector. And this is what we will look at next as we delve into how climate change can impact not only economically in the Caribbean, socially, health-wise, and even environmentally. You see, there is a premise on industries and sectors that are extremely sensitive to climate variation, such as I mentioned before, tourism and agriculture. The impact of climate change is deemed to be pretty serious, right, compared to the threats posed on climate variations in the climate. Many people are likely to be impacted by the changing climate. The contribution of primary agriculture to the Caribbean GDP is on average 10%. Ranging from 32% in Guyana to as low as 2% in Trinidad. But agriculture does have a major influence on the GDP earned by Caribbean nations. And agriculture is currently being seriously impacted by climate change. Floods and droughts, heat waves, windstorms can cause devastating crop losses. And if we're to move on to health, migration and breeding habits of vectors can change, and vectors such as the mosquito that spread dengue and Zika can actually increase in population, causing diseases to spread. There's also the case of respiratory diseases due to the exposure of pollen, moles, and dust. And if we are to look at the environmental issues that can occur from sea temperature rise, since the Celsius sea level rise, it may sound like a lot, but 70 to 90% of coral reefs will die at 1 degree. And it is sure that 99% of coral reefs will die at 2 degrees Celsius rise. And this was highlighted in an article that was written about the coral reefs in Belize. It will come up in the other slide. It's taking a while to change. It changed. I didn't change on my screen. Sorry. On my screen, okay. Good. So, if we're to, as I mentioned before, the coral reefs are very sensitive to sea temperature rise, and the coastal and marine environment in the Caribbean represents an important area of wealth. As you know, the coral reefs are called the rainforest of the sea because they're so diverse, and this diversity supports and contributes to the social and economic well-being of the people in the Caribbean. Right? If we're to look at Guyana, our coastal infrastructure is very important to our country because 90% of our population lives on the coastline, and economic asset can be very significant. Its estimated value is actually $3.2 billion US, and that was just in 2010. In Guyana, we don't have coral reefs, but we have mangroves, and our mangroves protect us on most of our coastline, and the value is estimated to be $4.624 billion per annum, and that's how much we stand to lose if our by climate change. And one important note, when we speak about health, we're not only speaking about physical health, but mental health. You see, the geographic displacement of population, damage to property, loss of loved ones, and so on, can cause an increase in mental health issues, drug abuse, domestic violence, depression, suicide, PTSD. Because I remember I went to a conference in 2017. My colleague from Dominica, Ashfred, has actually recently went through Hurricane Maria, and one of his colleagues had 8 family members missing. And you could have seen the worry. And imagine in the Caribbean region that many people do not know, that we have a very small population. Guyana is less than 1 million. A lot of people are very interconnected and know each other. So we feel losses more. And cancer can actually become more prevalent due to the increase of UV radiation. That is for chemicals and toxins as the temperature rises and sea level rises. When it comes to of related climate change related disasters such as storms and hurricanes, it can have a devastating impact on the sea when it comes to ecologically, socially, and unpredictable weather events such as rainfall can also impact our dry and wet seasons, and this in turn impacts our other sectors. And this is just the current situation that is occurring right now in the Caribbean. The challenges are quite devastating also, as predicted. Here we have, I'm showing Guyana in 5 intervals, and intervals we've also had floods. So it's constantly happening to us, and we have not really had a recuperate by when one is over, the next year and next one comes. So that is currently happening in Guyana. And it is predicted in the future that, and that will be on the next slide as we look at studies that have predicted the economic cost of climate change on the Caribbean. You will see that tourism represents on average 14.8% of the GDP and 12.9% of the employment in the Caribbean. Some projections indicate that losses can total to $22 billion annually by 2050, representing 10% of the regional economy. You see, this is how you can see how climate change specifically impacts on tourism. If we lose our coral reefs, if we have damages to hotels, properties, and so on, we can, in a very financially strained region. And climate change will not only impact tourism, it will impact every single sector that contributes to our GDP. Socially, there's an issue of food security. Because if we have damages to our agricultural sector, we will depend on imported food to feed our citizens. And if we already strained financially, the imported food might be less, and persons may not be able to afford the better products, and that leads to food security issues. And we must remember that wet vegetation promotes bacterial growth. It is actually predicted by the UNDP that 1 meter sea level rise will occur by 2100, and it is inevitable. And in the Caribbean, we must know that most of our major cities, ports, and airports are located on the coast. So they will be inundated by sea level rise and sea waters, forcing us to relocate. And research in global warming by IPCC predicts that on average global temperatures will increase by 1.4 and 5.8 degrees Celsius by 2100. And we already know that 99% of our coral reefs will be gone by 1.5. So what will occur at 5.8? So in this, we must remember that climate change, such as the pandemic we're going through right now, is not a we or us problem. It's not a me or I problem, sorry. It's a we and us problem. And we must be responsible, and governments, along with civil societies, need to positive and climate change in the Caribbean, because we stand to lose a significant amount of our earnings, our environmental systems, and even our ecosystems to this global phenomenon. Has the slide changed? Yeah. So governments have to play a crucial role in the climate process. They are responsible for creating regulatory frameworks to ensure that our countries, islands, are effectively adapted to the impacts of climate change. Government must engage at all levels with stakeholders. They need to play an effective role in educating citizens through agency and funded projects. Civil society organizations also play a role, as they need to educate persons and communities using community-based organizations and using funded climate projects, right? So in thematic areas such as agriculture, tourism, low energy carbon, and marine and water conservation, civil society organizations played a role in educating persons from the community or perspective. And this is needed in the Caribbean. And this has led the Caribbean Youth Environment Network organization. We are a non-profit governmental organization that focuses its resources on empowering youths and young persons in the Caribbean to develop their communities and to take action when it comes to social, economic, and environmental issues. We have over 800 members in over 20 countries in the wider Caribbean region. The organization youth in the climate process. We have had members, delegations to the COPs, and we have also members who are on the national climate change committees and have engaged in every global and regional climate change process available to the youth sector. We currently have 3 climate action geared events occurring that persons can get involved in. We have the Stay Alive and Strive campaign, which is a partnership with UNICEF on supporting environmental programming. We currently have the current youth survey. Your voice be heard on how youth we should make a difference on climate change, and this information will be fed into curriculum for preparations for COP26. And we're also preparing youths to effectively participate in UNCCC's conference of parties in Glasgow this year. We need youths and delegations, and we are prepared to help youths to properly get their voice heard in the right manner and to share their views on international level, because that is the responsibilities of civil society organizations, the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. In conclusion, the impacts of climate change affect small and developing states and large ocean states in the Caribbean. In present, climate change poses a great threat to everyone. The health of our people are put at risk everyday hurricanes in the Caribbean. In the future negative scenario, the sectors such as tourism and agriculture can be negatively impacted by our economies can be broken if we don't take action now. It is the role of the civil society to work and address challenges posed by climate change, as we need climate action and climate justice now. Thank you. Here are the communication information for the Caribbean Environment Network, so you can take part in our different ongoing climate action and climate justice events.
All right, thank you very much, Suphane, for that. Some very sobering statistics, but also a outlook and more or less enlightening path as to what some of the region's youth are up to, especially working with Caribbean Youth Environment Network. So quickly moving along, I want to jump straight to Joe Moy Phillips, who is replacing Miss Shirlyn Simon in this part of the presentation. So Mr. Phillips is a vice president for the University of the West Indies. Students are the alumni tomorrow, and I will allow him to continue to introduce himself and give his presentation. Mr. Phillips, take it away.
All right, so my name is Jomoy Phillips, and I am the vice president. I'm a vice president with responsibilities to disaster mitigation and climate change for the Students Today, Alumni Tomorrow, Vice Chancellor's Ambassador's Corps. And what is the Vice Chancellor's Ambassador's Corps, UWISTAT? So the UWISTAT Corps is a group of student advocates across the university's campuses across the region, and we advocate on various issues, including climate change, as it is a major threat to our region and our livelihood. So we'll be looking at what we as youths within the region are doing. Repeat? Okay, sure. So we'll be looking at what the youths within the region have been doing, especially the students of the University of the West Indies and UWISTAT in particular have been doing within the region. So the Caribbean islands, as small island developing states, are among the most vulnerable to the changing climate. Our weather patterns are becoming more unpredictable and threatening, and this threatens our economies, our livelihood, agriculture, ecosystem, and cultures. For us, climate change equals higher temperature, more frequent and severe hurricanes, floods, and droughts, as well as rising sea levels and decaying of reefs. And as a student from the rural area of Jamaica that deals mainly with agriculture, I can tell you that the severity of floods and the droughts have definitely impacted our agricultural sector, and at times there are scarcity in produces such as tomato and onion, which will also impact the economy because the prices of these crops would then raise to an amount that most persons would not buy or to purchase. So these challenges are the reasons the regional UWISTAT VPs of disaster mitigation and climate change continue to raise awareness and advocate about the importance of formulating solutions at the local and regional levels to keep our islands safe. And one way we do this is through our UWISTAT CAN, or Climate Change Advocacy and Action Network. So through UWISTAT, we highlight climate change impacts across. Through UWISTAT CAN, we highlight climate change impacts across the Caribbean. We promote collaboration and action with other regional youth groups such as CYEN, which is represented here today, and Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, which we'll hear from Eleanor later. And with we do this with the aim to be a regional advocacy body for climate change resilience. Currently, our USTAT has a membership of over 700 Caribbean youth, and we continue to grow. This outlet, this network is a voice to the climate change concerns of the regional youth and other environmental youth groups. So for the University of the West Indies, we have 5 main campuses, and currently the USTAT Ambassador Corps is on 4 of these campuses. And we will be we are excited because we know that in a short while, we'll be having the USTAT Ambassador Corps on all 5 campuses. So I am the Vice President specifically for the Mona Corps and the USTAT Mona Corps let's look at what the USTAT Mona Corps has been doing over the years. So young people across the Corps are engaged in initiatives to boost youth participation and engagement in addressing climate change, including coastal cleanups, tree planting and distribution, national and international partnerships. We have hosted extensive awareness campaigns and we have advocated through position papers. Our sister corps in USTAT St. Augustine has in Trinidad and Tobago, they have been having workshops and is currently undertaking research in geothermal energy, solar thermal energy, solar photovoltaic, and wind energy. Through these and other programs and initiatives, the UA is helping the region to make the essential transition to using our indigenous and plentiful renewable resources. The USTAT Civil Corps in Barbados have been conducting training workshops in solar PV and biogas technology involving people from various industries, including the agricultural sector, which is a very important sector in the Caribbean. The USTAT Open Campus, for those who are not within the region, the USTAT Open Campus is our online university space that is found across all 17 member countries within the university that are a part of the University of the West Indies. And through the Open Campus rather, they have been participating in youth summits on COVID-19 and environment, giving views on the challenges that have been witnessed during the current pandemic and what needs to be done to effectively address climate change, its effects on biodiversity and the environment. The USTAT joined forces with young people from the World Youth for Climate Justice to seek an advising opinion from the International Court of Justice on the Paris Agreement in order to strategize and outline measures in the fight for climate justice. We have continued to highlight renewable energy in the Caribbean through online technology forums with experts in the field. And as you can see from this picture, Caribbean is a beautiful place, and this is why we as youths are always trying to engage in solutions in order to combat the effects of climate change. And our solutions would have been to advocate for climate change legislation, behavior changes, and solutions which can mitigate negative impacts. And we want these things to be introduced. They are there in some countries, but we want more of these. Additionally, we want climate change to be taught in the school's curriculum from the primary school stage, and this should include appropriate behavior so the next generation will practice the right actions. We want to enact laws to enforce recycling, reducing waste, elimination of single-use plastics, And we want more renewable energy, such as solar and wind energy. And we will continue, and we are raising public awareness and knowledge. So, in conclusion, we are not privy to the upcoming events of our climate or change in climate, but we are privy to what we are privy to rather is the experience gained through natural disasters and their devastating impacts. We can never be fully prepared for the deadly impacts of natural disasters, but we must advocate for policies and practices that mitigate against them. We are running out of time. We must work together on solutions continuously so that we may adapt to the changing climate. Let us solve climate by 2030. We can't do it alone, not as students, not as professionals within the fields, not as a region, but it takes collective action from our world.
Thank you very much, Jomoy. I believe at this stage we will effectively make that transition into the discussion aspect. And I would like to take this opportunity to welcome two new individuals to this stage. I would like to welcome Miss Eleanor Terrelonge, founder and director of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, and Dr. David Smith of the Institute for Sustainable Development at Mona campus. Dr. Smith, I do apologize, but I would like to start my first question with you at this stage and ask you if you believe that governments are doing all they can to ensure that we are on the right road to make a difference by 2030. Do you believe that this is a possibility and a reality?
I don't think it's the reality. I believe that many governments understand that there is a need to move in the right direction, but I think many of them are still trying to struggle with how to do that. There's this constant between economics and climate change considerations, in the same way that we've seen a sort of constant tussle between the need to slow things down because of it and the law always saying, but what about the economy? What we need to be part of that mix is scientists and academia, and by scientists, I mean not just natural scientists, but social scientists who can come up with solutions that can point us in the right direction to actually solve the problems and still be able to carry out some kinds of an economy, even though the economy itself may look quite different.
Okay, great. I would like to take the opportunity to ask this same question to Eleanor. Eleanor, do you agree with Dr. Smith?
I agree with Dr. Smith from the point of view that no, I don't think the governments are doing enough. I think that I can speak a lot more to the Jamaican government because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So I don't want to diminish the work of anyone across the Caribbean. But I don't see the sort of kind of political urgency with climate change as with some other issues. So even if it is a conversation that's being had, there's no real urgency and a sort of, you don't really get the sense that the governments kind of understand how important climate change is, how necessary it is to consider climate in all aspects of development. I don't think that we've quite gotten to the place that we need to be, where governments are taking the threats of climate change seriously and actually, examining the effects of climate change on other aspects of our economy and our development. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Interesting. So how best do we recognize solutions in this area? And I think that is something I want to toss to Jomoy. How can we get the governments to recognize the challenges, to be able to work with NGOs and more or less create a tripartite arrangement to get these challenges undertaken to create real solutions for the Caribbean region? What is your opinion on this, Jomoy? How do you see it working out?
All right, so I can speak directly to the case of Jamaica as Eleanor did, and we currently work together in well, we have partnerships ongoing, and we can tell you that, especially in Jamaica, it's very difficult in order to reach to the government because they have their barriers, and in order to reach to them, what is necessary is having a consensus, having a core group, having numbers behind you in order to push activism and advocacy. And especially when you flood the media and persons are getting the perception that this is a real issue, then the government normally tries to step in, most times to try and cool you down. But once you're there, you're within the space and you can engage in conversations and you can continue to prick more consciences. The issue with the government that I find in Jamaica is that it's not a collective thing. You have one or two officials that are conscious of the fact that climate change is a real issue, that solutions need to be found. However, most persons do not buy in and do not support the notion. And that is what we need to change. And we need to be more vocal as it relates to this. But we don't have the consensus of the general public chiming in. So it's normally small groups here and there and not much attention being paid. So we need to be more active in our advocacy and a stronger base as advocates and more unity as climate, as advocates for climate justice.
Okay. And so we have some questions coming in via UETV. And I want to answer this one because it was focused towards Dr. Niles. Question it reads, one of the major contributors to climate change is culture. We have become endless consumers. How do we address issues arising out of consumerism? Dr. Niles, how do you want to address that?
So that's a very interesting question for me to respond to, particularly as someone from Trinidad and Tobago. I think the approach varies based on where you are, and I have to say it like that because different Caribbean islands face different realities. So if you live within the bounds of Trinidad and Tobago, you would know that your cost of electricity, your cost of water, your cost of waste collection and treatment, they're all incredibly subsidized, at least for now. And what that has contributed to has been utter wastage. There is no incentive whatsoever to conserve, right? And so what we have done is that it has contributed to a culture of just use and use and use and use because it's cheap. So there's endless light pollution, if you want to call it that. Like there's actually actual light pollution, but there's also residential facilities that are overly lit. Like there are tons upon tons of houses. If you look at our country in Trinidad and Tobago, you'd realize that because of the subsidy, let's say you have a leaking pipe in your property, you have no incentive to fix that pipe because you're not really paying for the water for most residents. And so that does contribute to a culture of wastage, and which is, I think, what the person was referring to. In that regard, what we need to do is address that issue head on by tackling some of the subsidies. We need to protect those who are socially vulnerable, right? But we also need to ensure that those that can pay for the resource do pay for the resource. If you're not able to pay, then don't pay. But if you can, you should pay. The other thing that we need to pay attention to, I think, across the region, is waking up to the fact that more and more countries are paying attention to food miles, right? And they're encouraging their own citizens to buy local. What that means is that the demand for our goods may be deemed as exotic and climate expensive. What that means for us is not just a reduction in foreign exchange receipts, but it also means that we need to transition there ourselves. We need to become makers. We need to become producers of our own agricultural products, but not just agricultural products, but goods. There are some things that we can make within the Caribbean at scale that would allow us to at least satisfy domestic demand and also export but we're not doing that as much as we should. And there are some good reasons for that in terms of not being able to manufacture competitively, and because of diseconomies of scale. There are some good reasons for that, but I think across the region, we need to really rethink how we view production and consumption, which is where I was talking about in my presentation about redesigning our approach, not just retrofitting, but really thinking through what the circular economy means. Like a number of countries, this is the last thing I'll say, a number of countries in the region are already examining or have already banned styrofoam and have banned single-use plastics. But we need to go beyond that. We need to really redesign several economic activities within our countries until they become truly circular, until they actually model a circular economy approach. And that will allow us to pay more attention to what we consume and what we produce and how the things that we do consume are actually produced.
And I want to jump to Eleanor. As an advocate, you work on the Climate Change Youth Council in Jamaica. Help us here. What is climate justice? And exactly how can we real benefits from this niche area as a region? What can we do here?
All right, so the concept of climate justice, and I think it comes back to something that Dr. Niles had said in his presentation about kind of rethinking our relationship with the environment. So normally when we the climate conversation, we hear a lot about the greenhouse effect and global warming and reducing emissions, and we talk a lot about the physical impacts of climate change. But what has been missing from the discussion was missing from the discussion before, that is becoming a much bigger part of the discussion now, is really the human impacts of climate change and how climate change affects varying groups, whether it is globally, whether it is locally. So we know that climate change, like COVID-19, like all other crises, affect the most vulnerable population. So whether it is the most vulnerable countries, like the small island developing states when compared to other countries, whether it is within our own countries, it's the poorest persons, people living in rural communities, people that don't have access to a lot of the resources that other people might have access to. Realize that these are the people that are most disproportionately affected by climate change. So they are the ones that are going to be less able to rebuild their livelihoods, or they're the ones that are dependent on the informal economy or dependent on fishery and agriculture. And when those things are affected by climate change, you realize that we see those persons being left out. So the concept of climate justice is finding a solution that is equitable for all. So it's not just a solution to the physical climate change impacts and, reducing global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. All of those things are important, but it's also extremely important in whatever solutions we're exploring to ensure that we are not further disenfranchising anyone. We have to ensure that everyone has equal access to the solutions that are being put into place. We have to ensure that whatever solutions we're implementing are culturally relevant. Even within CARICOM, we all might have some of the same challenges, but the cultural situation in each country is still a little bit different. So we have to ensure that our solutions are culturally relevant. So the concept of climate justice is really looking at climate change on a much more holistic level. And we also find that when you start to address some of these issues that come up with climate justice, a lot of these are societal problems. So these are issues that we could have addressed otherwise, but climate change is just shining a spotlight on it. So it provides the opportunity to improve a lot of our social services, a lot of our disaster risk management framework. It provides the opportunity for us to create solutions in a way that provides benefit to a much wider group of people. So that's basically a very short explanation of the concept of climate justice.
Okay. I want to jump to Dr. Smith, then I'll jump back to Suphane in relation to that question. But Dr. Smith, we have a question here from off of UWTV.org asking, how can sustainable agricultural practices aid in supplying food for more drought-induced islands?
A very good question. one of the main problems that we have moving towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 is the agricultural system, not just the way in which we grow food, but the way we transport it, consume it, the waste, the way in which we actually grow individual crops. And what we found in the Global Sustainable Development Report was that you were to change the entire agricultural system to move forwards. If we simply upgrade the system or do more of the same, we're going to be in problems. We're going to so much stress the planetary system that we're going to create major problems with climate. Look at our use of chemicals. We need to look at our use of land. We need to adjust our crops and our techniques to become much more intensive and to use our land much more productively. We need to be much more cognizant of drought-resistant crops. But I think also for the Caribbean, we need to be a lot more cognizant of ourselves as a region and what we can get from cooperating with each other. And when I say Caribbean, I mean CARICOM. I mean all the islands in the Caribbean, as well as those countries which have a Caribbean coast. If we started to work together, if we created a single economic space and allowed that space to apply to agriculture, we would probably be able to feed all the citizens of the Caribbean healthily. And if we cooperated on our techniques, if we cooperated on our arrangement, our way of building and value added to our crops, we would probably be able to create good quality economic value in agriculture as well as feeding Caribbean citizens. But that's going to require a change in the mindset of not just the governments of the islands of the Caribbean, probably as well the people of the Caribbean.
Okay, thank you. So jumping back to Suphane, your work with CYEN, what is one solution for climate change or climate action in the Caribbean that you've recognized has worked across the region?
Okay, so everyone is hearing me now. So one solution that I have recognized that CYN would have done that would have really fostered climate action would have occurred 2019 when we had the solar challenge, where we partnered with Solar Head of State, and we would have had a competition that would have sought for persons to show their creativity and to promote renewable energy transition while showing its benefit when it comes to climate action. And of involved poems, video, and not particularly persons of that or part of that NGO related to that. Citizens, normal persons did wonderful plays and created wonderful posters and art. And that would have required them to do a lot of research. And they would have educated themselves in such a way that they could have properly got the message across when it comes to the benefits of solar energy, the impact that the current energy usage is having on global warming. And I think once something is incentivized and persons also have prizes and so on, it really showed me that persons can really come together and creating persons throughout countries, because the prize that was a wonderful video which was done using animation by I can't remember her name right now, but she's very popular, and it really depicted Guyana and how Guyana can benefit from solar energy and how our current energy use is impacting climate change. And it was even the second and third prizes were very well done. Songs, essays, poems, and it showed me what need to really get cooperation from
Okay, so I want to ask the same question to Jamoy, and then I have a set of questions for everybody. So Jamoy, what is one solution with UWI that you recognize that can work across the Caribbean region?
All right. So before I answer that question, you asked a question earlier about what does climate justice mean, and being that we have been working in terms of trying to get climate justice a normal thing in Jamaica and globally as well. My definition as a public policy and management student for climate justice is holding people accountable for their actions. Any counterproductive actions as it relates to our climate should be persons who participate in these activities should be held accountable. So the solution now that USTAT has been doing is in terms of raising awareness. And we have been quite effective on this, and I would have seen persons' perceptions change in front of my eyes. Persons who were like, no, this is nothing, like, because of the cultural norms that we participate in here in Jamaica, I would have seen persons change and would have known no and are no rather encouraged and are motivated in being climate ambassadors and would have wanted to join the core and other youth groups that are challenging the notion of justice, climate change, climate justice, and awareness. And these persons are now out there being activists, and they were persons who wouldn't have believed before. So if we can change one person at a time and hopefully change the entire culture that is within the Caribbean as it relates to climate change, we would have done great justice to ourselves. So that's our solution right now.
Okay, so we have questions coming in online, and we have questions that are coming in via Facebook, and some are being texted to me as well. But I want to ask this one question to everyone. And I'm going to start with, since you already heard Jamal, I'm going to start with you. What, in your view, is the most important solution that, let's say, Jamaica or the Caribbean, depends on which direction you want to take it from, should undertake to work towards climate mitigation?
All right, first, for Jamaica, the main thing is the culture. So we have acts here in Jamaica that are not being enforced. One such act is the Fires Act of Jamaica, and stipulations are clear. Yet still you can go almost in any community and find an open fire being burnt. And it is something that is illegal, but it's not being policed. So there are acts that are not being policed, and there are policies that are and legislations that are being passed that are not yet complete. So when you have these things, they're there to say that yes, we have taken action, yet still really and truly there's no action being taken. Also, there's no reculturing of the citizens, and that is what we need to get done in order to move forward.
Okay. Dr. Niles, you're next. And this will probably be a two-point question to Dr. Smith as well, since you're both lecturers with the university. And this may interest Jamoy as well. How possible do you believe it would be to make climate a class across the various disciplines at the University of West Indies, and maybe even in across the educational principles? Do you believe it's possible, or
Okay, so I'm just going to be very clear about this. Anything is possible, right? With will, with resources, anything is possible. I think it's not just possible; it's desirable. I think it's so urgent that it should probably be viewed as an opportunity to expand the horizons of every student within the region, regardless of age. And so whether it's a university student or a primary school student, I think it is possible to make climate a class. I've seen it done in cultural studies. I've seen it done certainly in my class where I teach in international relations. I have an entire course that's focused just on climate policy. But we get persons coming in from law, from food science, you name it. It is possible to make climate a class across the length and breadth of the region. But just to be real clear about something that was said earlier, one of the things that we need to talk about when we talk about educating persons across this region is how we as a people balance climate change mitigation discussions with climate change adaptation discussions. Of course, because we're not contributing that much to the overall emissions. Our own emissions can sometimes be overlooked. It is important for us when we're making climate a class to talk both about mitigation, even if it's from the point of knowing how to have the conversation with persons from other countries, but also with our own family, so we can reduce our own carbon footprint. And then on the adaptation side, we need to talk about how we're going to live in a world that is potentially has no coral reefs, that is potentially hotter all of the time, with more mosquitoes and more diseases that the mosquitoes bring. Those are uncomfortable conversations, but they are necessary conversations about how we're going to adapt in the future.
Okay, so Dr. Smith, I want to toss the same question to you. Do you believe with Dr. Niles that is also anything is possible, and that we can also make climate a class at the university?
We can definitely make climate a class at the university. We could probably create a survey course so that we could ensure that every student has to take climate at some point during their undergraduate career. I think that could be done quite well and could create proper linkages with a variety of different subjects, everything from law to chemistry to sciences. In terms of mitigation, I think that we need to look at two main systems. We need to fix our transportation systems and towards better mass transport, better public transport, possibly through playing around with the economics of it, but definitely through ensuring that fuel-efficient or electrical vehicles or fuel cell vehicles can be brought in to the Caribbean and used for public transport. But we also need to look at buildings. And I just want to highlight the work of Professor Clayton and the late Professor Tara Dasgupta, both of the University of the West Indies, who created the Caribbean's first zero net energy building. And that's a building which generates more energy than it consumes. They've created this building. It sits opposite the building I work in. And it's a model for the Caribbean because it was designed and built by Caribbean architects, Caribbean constructors, Caribbean contractors. So it's a building which could be picked up and built anywhere throughout the Caribbean. And the kind of building, which is a multiple use building, we need to start building in that way more and more, and making sure that the energy use of our buildings is much more rational than it currently is. That way we can reduce our dependence and our energy costs, but we can also help to mitigate climate as well.
Okay, well, that is some interesting work from another university, especially in relation to climate mitigation and climate action. Unfortunately, we've run out of time at this stage, so there are plenty more questions coming in, but unfortunately we have to end the conversation. So at this stage, I think we have one more transition for you, and then I would like to hand it over to my colleague, who will give her closing remarks, Miss Celia Davidson Francis. Guys, take it away.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the UK's wettest February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds died down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion. Keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people.
I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up, even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lift others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
Make
I can
climate
ask
a
my
class.
teacher to make
climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Hello everyone, wherever you are in the world. I'm absolutely delighted to be here to officially close the UWI Solve Climate by 2030 dialogue. The University of the West Indies is pleased to be a partner in this international effort and to be recognized as a leader in promoting climate solutions. All of you here online are concerned about climate change and how it will affect your life and lifestyles in the future. As this webinar has shown, solutions are what we all need to focus on, especially the young, as it is they who will live longer in a climate-impacted world. It is my honor and pleasure to thank the presenters, Dr. Keron Niles, Ms. Suphane Alleyne, Mr. Jamoy Phillips, as well as the discussants, Dr. David Smith and Ms. Eleanor Terrelonge, for their very relevant and insightful contributions. Also, thanks to the moderator and co-organizer, Mr. Kevin Manning of the UWI Youth Development Program, for his excellent guidance through our event tonight. It has been my pleasure as Director of Alumni Relations for the UWI and Director of the Regional UWI Corps to work with Dr. Stacey Richards-Kennedy, the Director of the Office for Global Partnerships and Sustainable Futures, to put on this relevant and timely event, as well as our other partners. So I would also like to thank the Solve Climate 2030 team, Bard College, David Blockstein, and the Open Society University Network, Dr. Janet Carew and the UWI TV team, University Marketing and Communications, the Regional UWI Ambassadorial Corps, UWI students, alumni and staff who tuned in, as well as young people across the Caribbean. Thank you for attending and for your interest and concern about climate change. Let us all keep working on climate solutions and climate justice to solve climate impacts. Thanks to all partners and entities and institutions who've worked with us. From us all at the University of the West Indies, we say, keep on working to solve climate by 2030. Stay safe, everyone. Goodbye from the Caribbean.